I'm a professor in the history department here at UMKC, together with Dr. Villamanos down there from the Spanish department, and Chris Wolf. Where's Chris? There he is, who is our campus historian. We have worked to raise funds for the restoration of the murals painted by Luis Quintanilla in Haag Hall. In 2024, we secured the necessary funds through the Kansas City Monuments Coalition. This is a collaborative initiative that supports preservation and commemorative projects across our city. Thanks to the leadership of Diane Moody-Burke, also a colleague in the history department, the coalition received a generous grant from the Lenaghan Foundation to make this restoration possible. So I want to give a round of applause to everybody who down there. Thank you. We cannot thank you enough for making this possible. Tonight, we're honored to welcome two distinguished guest speakers. Patrick Lenaghan is the chair of the Department of Prints and Photographs at the Goya Center of the Hispanic Society of America. An internationally recognized scholar, he earned his BA from Columbia University and his PhD from the Institute of Fine Arts at New York University. He began his career at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where he worked in both the Department of European Paintings and the Department of European Sculpture and Decorative Arts. Since 1995, he has been with the Hispanic Society, organizing numerous exhibits that span from Baroque sculpture to Picasso's engagement with Spanish literature. So we have here a variety of knowledge condensed in one person. His international curatorial projects include Imágenes del Quixote, which was housed at the Museo del Prado in Madrid, Spain. In 2018, he was named a corresponding member of the Real Academia de Bellas Artes de Santa Isabel de Hungría in Seville. This is one of the Royal Academies of the Fine Arts in Spain. I believe it's the oldest one, if not the oldest one, one of the oldest ones. So that is one of our speakers. Patrick will give the lecture here, as Vice Chancellor Crispino mentioned. Then we will have a second part of this program upstairs by the murals. Our second speaker tonight is Christine Kierig. She is a PhD candidate in the history of art at the University of California at Berkeley. Her dissertation examines the lives of two exiled Spanish modernists in the Americas, Joseph Renaud in Mexico and Luis Quintanilla in the United States, focusing on their mass media projects for peripheral cultural institutions, including a rural luxury hotel in Cuernavaca, Mexico, that's for Renaud, a Midwestern University in Kansas City, that's us here, UMKC, and the vibrant film and cinema industries of the time. Her work explores how these artists staged their lives in exile on either side of the southern U.S. border before beginning her fieldwork for the dissertation, which that started in 2024. She served as a curatorial assistant at the Acaba Foundation for Graphic Arts at the Legion of Honor Museum in San Francisco. Her research has received support from the Lenaghan Foundation, the Henry Lewis Foundation for the American Arts, and the Mexican government, among other institutions. We are very grateful for their presence here tonight, and we continue to celebrate, preserve, and explore the legacy of Luis Quintanilla's art at UMKC. So thank you, a big round of applause for you.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you to the University of Missouri, Kansas City for this invitation to come and speak. Thank you to Liliana and Christine for accompanying me on these days. I'm touched and honored to be here. I mean, my father was from Clinton, Iowa. My wife is from Rockford, Illinois. I know about Midwestern hospitality, but still, when I see it, I'm grateful. I'm also, as a museum professional, honored and happy to see how these murals that were a part of the building and everyone walked by have come back to life, both physically, that they've been restored, that they're being cared for, and they're just on a wall, objects, unless you take the trouble to look at them and understand them. And that's what I see happening here too. So as a museum professional who wants to see objects of cultural heritage appreciated in their context, in their community, this is fantastic for me. That it should be with Don Quixote, a literary figure who has appeared in art that I love and study, is just icing on the cake. So I would say that you residents in Kansas City are fortunate to have Luis Quintanilla's frescoes of Don Quixote nearby. Sorry. It was all clear when it was explained to me. All right, so if these remarkable paintings have not always received the praise they deserve, and someone said to me, I don't know what they're about, I think the reason lies in the painter's remarkable vision, which led him to depart from an accepted tradition. To explain what I mean, I would like to examine the context in which we might approach his works. To begin, we must consider the challenges that anyone faces when they come to illustrate Cervantes' novel Don Quixote. Then I would like to look at three great Spanish artists, Goya, Picasso, and Dalí, who address this subject. Illustration is not a simple transfer of word to image. It forces artists to make decisions that can lead to radically different results. So even if they don't want to impose their vision, the process of designing these images forces them to do so. The simple question of which episodes to depict and how to do this is only the beginning. In the case of Don Quixote, it gets more complicated since critics can't agree on what the novel means. On a literal level, at first glance, the story seems straightforward. After reading too many books of chivalry, a country gentleman in 17th century Spain decides to leave home and become a knight errant. But the world he finds is not the one described in his books. No other knights remain to challenge him, and no princesses await him for their rescue. Undeterred, he reconstructs reality to conform with his reading. For instance, windmills become giants, inns are castles, and so on. The world, however, is not so malleable, and he experiences a series of comic misadventures. Delving deeper, however, nobody agrees what this novel's about. For some, the novel is a satire about books, particularly chivalric romances, a genre everyone knew in Cervantes' day. For others, it critiques the customs of 17th century Spain, above all, the code of knightly behavior. But today, most people think it tells the story of an idealist who fails gloriously in an altruistic quest. These interpretations have significant consequences. In the first two, Don Quixote becomes a comic, almost ridiculous figure, while in the last he is a noble soul. Moreover, we can trace these shifts over the centuries. During the 17th and 18th century, the comic vision prevailed, whether as broad farce. Here you have an episode where they're trapped in the forest, they hear these incredible noises, Quixote thinks, I'm going to attack them. Sancho doesn't want this, he ties the horse so it can't go. Sancho is so afraid then that he evacuates his bowels. Quixote realizes this and says, oh, you smell and not the best. This is the humor that enchanted them in the 17th century. In the 18th century, we have a more elegantly refined humor. Don Quixote has, in this image, through some total fluke of luck, defeated a much younger, much fitter opponent who was going to unhorse him. And he's also broken the guy's ribs, but you don't see any of that. You just see him standing proudly in a mincing way over his opponent. In the 19th century, critics imposed a romantic interpretation of a visionary dreamer in an uncomprehending world. And that is the interpretation most of us know today. Nonetheless, this view is although it's widely held, important scholarly voices have always disagreed. Such discrepancies point to the impossibility of establishing a single meaning for the novel. And in fact, illustrators have a range to choose from, which in turn gives them a lot of room to be creative. These complexities emerge in the seemingly simple question of how do you portray the protagonist, Don Quixote? Cervantes gives the illustrator some clues. He's, quote, close on to 50, of a robust constitution, but with little flesh on his bones and a face that was lean and gaunt. Later on, he's described as tall, lean, lanky, with cheeks that appeared to be kissing each other on the inside of his mouth. Even so, artists respond differently. Again, in the 17th century, before we saw above, Don Quixote is generally an older man, yet he's strong and vigorous, whereas in later versions, like the Doré, he is less imposing, even ludicrous. The altered features create significant differences. Is Don Quixote a credible opponent or a wisp of a man? We should remember that he inflicts as many beatings as he suffers. So if artists draw him as a frail figure, his adventures can become pathetic. You see him on your right there as a very thin man, a woman kneeling in front of him, and on the left, you can't really see him, but take it on faith, he's hiding behind his horse there as they're throwing stones at him. So, you know, these adventures are so pathetic that the viewer can consider him sympathetically. But should Don Quixote look like someone who can inflict real damage, here he is with the sword over the guy who's been sent out to attack him, or he's attacking, in the other image, a stage theater of puppets, these adventures become less endearing. We see these issues from the very beginning. The first scene in most editions depicts Don Quixote reading in his study, showing how his pleasure at reading passes from enthusiasm to a fanaticism that inspires him to go out on his quest. This introduces not only the man, but also his world. More importantly, it sets the tone for what follows. Because the initial images seem so self-explanatory, we might easily overlook the artist's role here. To begin, they are not depicting an exact moment. They have to encapsulate the process that Cervantes describes over several paragraphs. From this, they select details that they can recreate visually. All of this helps them to suggest how the hero is reading at all times of the day. They also have to respond, and this is far trickier, to the narrator's tone, which is not visually translatable because it runs back and forth between a dry, factual prose and then sly digs with a keen sense of irony. So the question is the narrator mocking Don Quixote or sympathizing with his passion? Not surprisingly, artists have represented this scene differently, and in the process, they set the story differently. So, there we go. All right, so in the first extended series of the novel from the 17th century, the French artists Jérôme David and Jacques Lenaghan depict Don Quixote wearing a nightcap during the day. So that tells us how his love of this reading, he's lost all sense of time. His obsession appears in many other details. He reads from one book while he holds another, a third rests precariously on his lap, and yet more lying confused piles on the table. As he pores over his book, he is so engrossed in it that he ignores his niece who delivers admonitions from the back. Apart from the books and the suit of armor, which he's shortly going to put on, the space is otherwise bare, evoking his genteel poverty. He has, after all, sold off most of his property to pay to buy these books. The tight setting emphasizes the figures. but since their faces remain expressionless, our attention rests fully on their gestures. The print thus presents a strong, forceful image that focuses on the broad folly of the knight's reading with little sense of emotional or psychological insight. In contrast to this comic, if disparaging depiction, Doré offers us a more sympathetic portrait 200 years later. He presents a lovable madman. The artist turns, however, to much of the same images that we just saw, the same details. Don Quixote gestures spontaneously as he reads. Books are strewn chaotically about. Where the previous illustrator had emphasized the austere settings and left one to imagine what Don Quixote was reading, Doré, however, represents a medieval fantasy flooding into the room. A plumed knight charges across the back of Don Quixote's chair. A beautiful princess kneels before him, pleading with him to rescue her from her captor. And a winged monster carries off a knight and a lady. To all of this, Quixote responds by raising his sword impetuously. This man seems a sweet old gentleman who's just gotten carried away with his reading. He looks frailer and older, and his facial expression shows personality. The artist includes whimsical touches, the miniature knights clambering over mice, the head whose hair is caught in the drapes, and a knight clambering over a book. All of this suggests a good-natured tolerance for the foibles of chivalry. The setting enhances this amiable atmosphere, where the light in the room, and the light in the room in the earlier engravings has been harsh. Here it filters in softly through the window on the right. By representing Quixote's daydreams and filling the room with these figures, Doré abandons all objectivity. We enter into the knight's world fully. And since he and his fantasy are presented sympathetically, the critical edge of the earlier images is lost. We're no longer mocking Don Quixote and his character. This image suggests admirable traits in the man. This distinction is with Sancho, or undertaking the attack and suffering defeat. What the artist decides and how he represents the figures, windmills, landscape, reveal much about him and his interpretation of the novel. Like the first readers, the earliest illustrators reveled in the comic aspects of the episode. In the 17th century, engravings, like from the series we examined above, emphasizes the physical impact of the collision with a broad humor that basically resembles slapstick. We see the moment immediately after Don Quixote's ill-advised assault. He clutches his broken lance, the other half is still there, stuck in the windmill's vein, and he's still falling to the ground. He's about to be trapped under his horse. Sancho rushes up in great distress. Again, the character's emphatic gestures and blank facial expressions present the episode as broad comedy, like we've seen in the other episodes, and nothing more. Doré, however, presents a much more sympathetic and detailed version, and he spreads it out over 2 pages. In the first, he shows the scene with sort of an epic sweep from above and afar, portraying the moment of impact. Don Quixote has just caught his lance in the vein of the windmill, which pulls him and his horse up. The reader is left to imagine their fall. Or we can turn the page. In the next scene, Doré reverses the viewpoint to one close to the scene and low to the ground. Don Quixote lies flat on his back with his horse at his side and his shattered lance at his feet. Sancho, breathing loudly, rushes up, but as you look at it, it doesn't seem to be moving quite that rapidly. In spite of the donkey's resistance, that is very clear, the perspective in Don Quixote's pose emphasize his vulnerability, yet a hint of his indomitable spirit may be seen in the rigidity of his figure. He's taken a bad fall, it's true, but we know he's going to get up and he's going to keep fighting giants. Consequently, although Doré underscores the folly of the undertaking, he also seems to admire Don Quixote's idealism and determination. So, with this kind of broad, brief survey of what are the challenges that an illustrator faces or an artist faces when they confront the story, I think to give us a sense of what Quintanilla is doing with his murals, we should look now at the three Spanish artists, Goya, Picasso, and Dali, who made their own efforts to engage with Cervantes' novel. So, beginning with the first one, Goya. Over the course of his long career, Goya turned to Cervantes' tale twice. First, when he contributed to the Royal Academy's edition of the novel of 1780, and second, when he created a sepia drawing of Don Quixote reading. He created that one about 30 or 40 years later. The Royal Academy edition was a major publishing event in its day, and it surprises many today that the Academy asked him for only just one image. But we should remember that at this time he was a young artist who had not yet risen to the prominence he later enjoyed. So he was tasked with depicting the brawl that ensues after Quixote and Sancho are traveling, and they run across the people from one town who have that banner, and their town and the neighboring town are in a debate because just a totally silly thing. They got lost. Somebody lost their donkey, and they started braying, and it's a silly episode in which Sancho starts braying. They think he's making fun of them, and then another one of these massive cudgeling ensues. Sancho gets beaten up, and Quixote gets beaten up in the end, too. So Goya produces this image that resembles, in many ways, a previous one from 1771, and it didn't get included. And the question is, why didn't it get included? Because the episode had appeared in his previous edition, and it would appear in this image in an edition that the Royal Academy published 2 years later. So it's a bit of a mystery why why Goya's image of this scene didn't get included, and we don't really know. But that is the first effort, and nothing further happens. The Academy decides that this image isn't going to go in this luxurious edition that's part of a concerted effort on their part, and Goya leaves the subject until later he creates this drawing of Don Quixote reading. Here the emaciated knight with wild hair stares out at the viewer while a thin greyhound looks up at him, and a group of figures flies in at the top riding a winged wolf or a dog. I can't really tell. It's a fantastic creature. Then, comprised of a cleric with ass ears, an angry man holding keys, and two bare-breasted women, perhaps representing folly and comedy, the whole thing is a bit of a puzzle. Its general structure recalls perhaps Goya's one of his most famous etchings, The Sleep of Reason from the Caprichos, which is a little bit earlier, where animals of night and unreason flood in over the slumbering artist. But for the composition and the setting, I think Goya really turned to the image of Don Quixote reading that was in that 1780 edition from Madrid that the Royal Academy did. And the differences between the two, I think, are striking. Goya's drawn a thinner character. He adds the apparition at the top. Although that feature, the apparition at the top, can remind us of the Caprichos, it lacks the playful quality that the Caprichos have, so that this image of Don Quixote reading takes on a more biting tone. In general, this bitter, biting quality is in keeping with Goya's general attitude as he explores more about themes of irrationality and darker elements. So the other thing with drawings that we need to remember is that Goya included them in albums where he arranges them in sequences so they make mini stories. Now, if we look at this one in the context of its album, we have a problem here too, because it occurs in a sequence where these scenes are cudgelings and stabbings, or just some very odd subjects. The only common thread, and you really have to stretch to find it, is that he's focusing on strange or irrational behavior, and that this would be something that could have resonated with him at this time, because Spain is, as he creates it, Spain is experiencing the invasion of Napoleon, and it's a horrible time. They suffer the atrocities of war, the hardships. So we don't really know what to make of the drawing. A friend later on remembered that Goya had told him, quote, that he had played with the idea of some original caprichos titled The Visions of Don Quixote, in which he would paint in a new style the fanciful imaginings of the Mad Knight of La Mancha. But Goya never did this. Perhaps this is because, notwithstanding the painter's fascination with irrational behavior, Goya's artistic process and vision were incompatible with the task of illustration. Throughout his career, Goya consistently takes a scene and gradually strips it of extraneous detail so that he can focus on what he thinks is the core, at the heart of this visual motif. And then he emphasizes it so that it really has an impact. While this technique resulted in powerful images, it's not compatible with illustration of a text, because those details are what you need. So I think in this case we can see why Goya's artistic vision and process didn't really mesh well with Don Quixote, and you've got just these two sort of glancing encounters. In the 20th century, there are two celebrated Spanish artists, Pablo Picasso and Salvador Dalí. They faced the same problem when they came to incorporate the figure in their artistic world. Picasso, I think, found the subject frankly distasteful, and he seldom portrayed it. Admittedly, I've been showing you images from the Hispanic Society collection. This is not one of them, and there are a few others. This image has become iconic. You can find it on coffee mugs. I have it on an eraser. It's everywhere. But because it's everywhere, we're missing a fact, which is, it's in 1955, it's an ink drawing. He makes it, it goes on the cover of a French journal. And it's almost a throwaway. And we see it so often, we don't realize how seldom Don Quixote appears in Picasso's output. In fact, what I'd like to show you is this print, which is in the Hispanic Society collection, and I'm very proud of it because there are only a few impressions of it, and we acquired it in the last 20 years. This occurs in a very interesting moment in Picasso's career in 1937, when he was exploring many different styles and techniques, and in this case you can see it goes with his neoclassical interests, and it's got a wide range of techniques for printmaking. So it fits artistically in the technique way, but something about this didn't click with him, and it disappointed him because he never finished the printing plate, and he never issued a finished edition. So there are only a dozen or so proofs that survive. And I think here the explanation is when one compares the artist's personal mythology with the story of Don Quixote, you see exactly why it doesn't, why the story is uncongenial. With Cervantes gives us an exaggeratedly humorous treatment of Don Quixote's chaste and unrequited love for Dulcinea. This just completely flies in the face of Picasso's erotic self-image. He depicts himself as a minotaur or a sexually vigorous artist. Thus, the withered old knight who'd become commonplace was doubtless anathema to Picasso. At the same time, Cervantes describes a nation that similarly may have held little appeal for Picasso. Picasso proclaims he's Spanish, but then the Spain that he finds in Don Quixote is perhaps not the Spain that Picasso wants. It's a small place of rundown inns. No one is super heroic. No one is wildly successful. So I think that too didn't resonate. And the relative absence of Don Quixote in Picasso's output is even more notable if you think that towards the end of his life, Picasso did turn to Spanish literary subjects like Rojas Celestina and the poems of Góngora. So I think if we look at two late prints that Picasso does of Don Quixote and Dulcinea, these are also not in the Hispanic society, we can see this because Don Quixote has turned into a mosquetero, a musketeer on your left, and on the right he's an artist, he's almost Velázquez. And Dulcinea is not a humble peasant who tends to swine, she's a voluptuous nude. So, there's a great deal of alteration here, and I think that just goes to the point that Picasso didn't like the story that Cervantes told. On the other hand, Dalí embraced the novel, and he found a congenial subject which inspired one of his finest print series. And although it dates from towards the end of his career, 1957, I think you can see how, even though he's left surrealism behind, and he's adopted a more eclectic style, he's still interested in the questions of art and its association to reality. And so Don Quixote is really in his wheelhouse. These interests make him really attentive to the play between the world and Don Quixote's imagination. So he starts off with an image of the Sistine Madonna, which is by Raphael, and he associates it with his wife Gala, and then he associates that with Dulcinea. So through these various steps, he's made Don Quixote part of his world and his artistic concerns. When you come to, again, the windmills, you can see in some ways we are following Doré, but he's transformed it into his world so that these big X's represent the windmills. And you've got this, what Dalí is doing so brilliantly is there's reality and there's what Don Quixote is imagining together in a way that works visually as one. And so he's managed to take Cervantes' story, the essence, and bring it into his world and create something cogent and consistent. And then in this image, you can see how he's reduced the opponents to towering X's with the giants sort of hovering over, and there is Don Quixote as a typical Dalí figure staring up at them. And this is this is why I think this series is such a success, because Dalí has done something that Picasso and Goya just couldn't do, which is to bring the Cervantes story into his artistic vision and into his artistic technique. And we're going to go on to look at the frescoes, and I think what makes the frescoes so successful is that Quintanilla has done something very similar, in that he's taken the issues and concerns that he had as an artist and as his style, and he's found the elements in the Cervantes' novel to create something that is of its time, because it reflects Quintanilla's experience in Kansas at that moment, but I think, and I hope, that it continues to resonate for us today, both those of you who are part of the UMKC community and people like me who are not, but can see how this whole story is part of a broader encompassing picture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Patrick. Now we will start our guided